I never thought a simple screen could become a direct portal to hell. I was fasting and praying in the early morning when suddenly the room was filled with a strange buzzing sound, as if thousands of voices were speaking at once. The clock saw 3:33, and the Spirit took me in a vision. I found myself in a gigantic theater carved from black stone. Instead of seats, there were shadows, and instead of a stage, there was a burning screen projecting red and black lights. When I looked closely, I understood what I was watching. It was Netflix, but in hell, and every series that was broadcast was a spiritual noose, an invisible chain that trapped those who watched it on earth. I felt terrible because I realized that what many call entertainment was actually a demonic sermon. Before I continue telling you what I saw, I want you to comment below. Do you think modern series have a spiritual influence? Your answer could open someone else's eyes and break a chain they don't even know they're carrying. The first thing I saw in that dark room was a burning screen so large it covered the entire horizon. It wasn't like a normal television, it was a living wall of fire and smoke, where each spark formed images that transformed into scenes from familiar series. I recognized titles that had been popular on Earth, but here they were distorted, twisted, laden with occult symbols. Each episode wasn't just a story, it was a ritual, an invocation. Demons in the form of actors appeared on stage speaking words in dead languages, while the souls who watched were trapped, unable to tear their eyes away. I felt I wasn't in a simple movie theater, but in a hellish liturgy disguised as entertainment. Around me, thousands of shadows sat as spectators, but they weren't free, they were bound by chains that emerged from the screen itself. Every time an episode began, those chains tightened and dragged them deeper into the fire. I saw young people, old people, men, women, all hypnotized. Some laughed, others cried, but none could stop. Every scene of violence, every blasphemous dialogue, every insinuation of sin became a spiritual hook that pierced their bodies and held them to the seat. It was then that I understood what the Spirit was revealing to me. It wasn't Netflix that was the problem, but the messages behind it, messages sown like seeds of hell to captivate souls. A demon stood in the middle of the theater as if he were a presenter. His voice was like breaking metal. Welcome to the real show. Every time you turn on your screen on Earth, we here add a chain. Every season is a sermon, every episode is a pact, and the best part is that they think it's just fun. The shadows applauded, not with joy, but with the sharp click of chains. Each blow resonated like an echo of condemnation. I trembled because I recognized scenes identical to those I had seen before in my own life, unaware that behind each story lay a dark plan. The screen then showed a famous series about drug trafficking. I saw how they glorified violence, quick riches, and idolatry of the kingpins. But in hell, every bullet fired in that series was a fiery dart that pierced the viewers, chained. Each cry of power was a covenant seal on their foreheads. Satan himself appeared in a corner of the screen, disguised as a producer, and with laughter said, "Come, I don't even have to force them. They themselves pay for their damnation, with their time, with their attention, with their worship of sin." At that moment, I understood that what we consume on earth consumes us eternally. I also watched horror series where everything was supposedly fiction, but in the theater of hell, every scene of witchcraft opened real portals. Demons emerged from the screen, walked among the shadows, and attached themselves to their backs like parasites. Some entered their mouths while they laughed, believing it was simply a fictional scare. Hell celebrated because fear was food, an open door. Satan shouted, "I don't need stone altars, they themselves bring my altar to their homes with a monthly subscription," and the demons applauded, waving burning tickets that bear the names of entire countries. The screen changed and showed seemingly harmless comedies, but every mockery of God, every joke about the holy, every vulgar word was turned into burning coals that pierced the spectators. I saw young people repeating phrases from those series on earth, unaware that with each word they were binding themselves to a pact of mockery. The chains in hell shone brighter when someone repeated offensive dialogue, as if each laugh were a sacrifice offered to the abyss. I understood that the enemy doesn't always need explicit violence. It's enough to ridicule the sacred to corrode the faith of an entire generation. Finally, I watched romantic series charged with lust and adultery. In the infernal theater, every sensual scene was transformed into flames that licked the spectators, burning them with pleasure that was pain, their faces twisted between laughter and screams, trapped in a cycle of insatiable desire. Demons in the form of directors applauded and said, "True love no longer matters, we've replaced it with empty passion and eternal chains." The shadows wept, but they couldn't stop staring. It was like a drug coursing through their veins, an invisible addiction that kept them bound even after death. The spirit whispered in my ear at that moment, "What you see is what many call entertainment, but is actually sermons from the enemy. Not everyone perceives it, but every image, every word, every scene carries seeds, some are of life, others of damnation. Choose wisely what you consume, because what feeds your eyes will eventually govern your soul." That phrase pierced me because I understood that the true battlefield is not only in the pulpit, but also on the screen, and millions are already losing that war without realizing it. Suddenly the burning screen split into thousands of fragments like fiery stained glass windows. Each fragment displayed a different series, some extolled violence, others magic, others perversion, and I understood that this wasn't simple entertainment, it was an infernal library, an archive of dark doctrines designed to train demons and, at the same time, educate entire generations on Earth. I saw legions of lesser spirits, smoky in appearance and with red eyes, sitting in front of these projections to learn. It was a seminar of the abyss where each scene served as a manual for the corruption of the soul. A larger demon, dressed like a school teacher, pointed at the screens with a burning iron staff. Lesson 1. Teach that evil is attractive. Lesson 2. Ridicule the holy. Lesson 3. Normalize what was once an abomination. Every time a spirit repeated the phrases, the fire in its body intensified, and a new chain emerged to bind a human shadow on Earth. I understood that every script written on Earth could be used as a liturgy in hell, and that while millions of viewers laughed or cried at these stories, in the abyss they were celebrated as strategic victories. The vision led me to see how some demons took notes on the series like diligent students. When a corrupt character rose to power and wealth, they wrote leadership models for young people. When scenes of witchcraft were shown, they wrote down methods of initiation into modern magic, and when scenes of lust disguised as romance appeared, they described tactics to destroy homes. I realized it was no coincidence that certain themes were repeated so often in the productions. It was a calculated plan, where the scriptwriters, perhaps unknowingly, were being inspired by invisible forces to create a catechism of hell. I also saw demons disguised as producers holding contracts in their hands. Each contract glittered with the names of actors, directors, and writers. "They think they're signing for fame and money," one said, "but in reality, they're committing entire generations." And I saw how those signatures transformed into threads of fire that rose to the screen and descended to Earth, connecting millions of viewers. It was like a spiritual spider web, each episode not deeper, each series marathon a thicker chain. Satan walked among them with an air of pride and said, "With each script, with each scene, I sow what I will reap at judgment." The most disturbing thing was seeing that some human shadows on Earth were literally trapped inside the screen. They were people who had consumed so many hours of those series that their spirits were imprisoned in the episodes. They walked like zombies inside fictional worlds, repeating phrases by heart, unable to wake up. They tried to scream, but their voices were absorbed by the echo of the television dialogue. Satan pointed at those souls and shouted, "These are my real actors, trapped in the eternal script I wrote, and while they repeat my lines, their families weep on Earth, unaware that they have been spiritually lost." At that moment, I understood that hell didn't just use Netflix as a means of entertainment, but as an altar of instruction. Each series was like a book of demons, each scene a ritual, each episode a dark sermon. The demons rose from their seats, flew to Earth, and entered the homes of those who had left their screens on all night. And in the vision, I saw how, while a family slept, spirits entered their rooms through the light of the television, sowing nightmares in the children and spiritual apathy in the adults. The spirit spoke to me in that instant with a firm voice. "Do you see what they call fiction? This is doctrine. what they call culture. This is strategy. It's not about banning screens, but about opening our eyes to discern, because every minute in front of these stories is an altar raised, and every altar has an owner. It either belongs to the light or it belongs to the darkness. My knees trembled because I understood that millions were already worshipping the enemy without even realizing it, and the infernal theater celebrated every second of distraction, every blasphemous laugh, every tear shed by fictional characters. The vision intensified, and suddenly the fiery screens began to show scenes that weren't simple stories, but entire ideologies disguised as fiction. I saw demons who looked like screenwriters writing on burning scrolls messages that read, "Love without limits, everything is relative, truth is subjective." Those scrolls became episodes of series that millions watched without question. Satan stood up like a proud director and proclaimed, "With these narratives, I shape entire generations. I don't need weapons when I have stories. I don't need armies when I have screenwriters." And every word he spoke transformed into chains that fell upon young people and teenagers, sealing their hearts with lies presented as entertainment. I saw scenes appear on the screen that normalized sin as something commonplace, stories where infidelity was presented as freedom, where violence was justice, where witchcraft was culture, where spiritual confusion was fashionable. And every time someone on earth applauded those scenes or shared them with enthusiasm, a demon in hell received a crown of fire as a reward. I understood that the series weren't just invented stories, but dark catechisms that trained the heart to accept what was previously rejected. What the Bible calls an abomination on the screen was called progress. Then I saw how young people on earth imitated what they saw in those productions. Some repeated gestures, phrases, ways of dressing, others were inspired to make radical decisions. But in hell, every imitation was a stamp on their forehead that glowed red, as if to say, "This one already belongs in the script." Satan would point at it and shout, "They think they're making choices, but in reality they're just following my scripts." It was there that I understood why so many lives seemed to repeat themselves like copies without their own identity, because they were being molded by an invisible director. The most terrifying thing was seeing how those series were used to prepare the final generation. In one scene, I saw how demons disguised as teachers taught multitudes of young people that sin doesn't exist, that it all depends on how you feel. Each class was an episode, each student a viewer who ended up believing that the only truth was what their screen showed. Satan raised an iron megaphone and declared, "This generation no longer reads holy books, no longer prays, no longer listens to the voice of the Spirit, but they do binge-watch my stories. They are moved by my characters, they are my invisible army, trained in living rooms, unaware that they are already soldiers in my cause." I also saw how entire families were divided by these spiritual traps. Some parents, without discernment, let their children consume all kinds of content, thinking it was harmless, but in the vision, each chapter the children watched was like a poisoned dart that marked them. Demons laughed as they said, "Parents give their children to us voluntarily and don't even have to sign a covenant, just turn on the screen and let it play." And I understood that the enemy knows the greatest battle is not in the temples, but in the homes, where every room has become an altar of images. Suddenly, a projection of what they called modern heroes appeared on the screen. They were charismatic characters who were acclaimed on earth, but in hell were represented as fiery puppets. Every time one of them uttered inspirational phrases in the series, in the infernal theater, they sounded like demonic decrees. I saw how the crowds applauded them and their applause became invisible contracts. Satan shouted, "Applause is my signature. Every emotion invested in my characters is an altar erected in my honor." And the demons screamed with jubilation, celebrating the viewer's naivete. Finally, the Spirit spoke to me clearly, "What you consume shapes who you are." Many believe they are free because they can choose what to watch, but in reality, they are slaves to what they are shown. The enemy doesn't need you to worship him directly. All you have to do is ignore my word while feeding on his. That is the silent pact that millions are signing every day. And as that voice echoed, I saw invisible chains descend from the roofs of millions of homes, tying the hands of those with a remote control. Every click was an inverted prayer, Every binge-watching series was a secret cult, and the darkness celebrated because it was gaining ground unopposed. The vision suddenly changed, and the infernal theater transformed into a hall of gigantic mirrors, all made of liquid fire. In each mirror, scenes from famous series were projected, but distorted. I saw how the trapped viewers approached, and instead of seeing their own reflection, they saw the characters they so admired. Some saw drug dealers, others saw witches, others saw lustful figures. It was as if the productions had erased their true identity and cast them in a fictitious role. Satan walked among them, laughing. They believe they are free, but their souls have been rewritten. Now they live what I write, now they reflect what I project. The most chilling thing was when I recognized the faces of believers. I saw young Christians who had once preached, but in the mirror they no longer reflected themselves as servants of God, but as characters from the series they secretly consumed. One had phrases of violence on his chest, another was dressed as a magician, and yet another repeated phrases mocking the holy. Satan approached and said, "They think they can separate the spiritual from the cultural, but there is no separation here. Everything that enters their eyes shapes who they are. Their Bible is closed, but their screens are on. Who are they really worshipping?" And the echo of his words struck my spirit like a hammer. I also saw religious leaders trapped in those mirrors. Some had consumed so many hours of those productions that they now repeated in their sermons trendy phrases taken from TV shows as if they were wisdom. In hell, those phrases were seen as chains gagging their mouths. Every undiscerning word was another lock on their lips. Satan pointed and mocked, "Preachers, you are not my actors disguised as pastors. You use my script in the pulpit and think you're creative. I give you the ideas, I give you the references, and you applaud them from your altars." And I saw how their congregations were dragged behind those hollow words. In the mirrors, scenes of entire families sitting in front of the television were also projected. I saw how on earth fathers, mothers, and children spent hours binge-watching together, while in hell they appeared sitting in cages, each cage marked with the production's logo. The children repeated dialogues from corrupt characters, and those phrases were like seeds in their hearts. The parents didn't realize it, but in the vision, each word sowed roots of fire that grew toward the ceiling. Satan mocked them. They think they're spending time with their family, but in reality, they're holding a cult in my honor. I saw demons disguised as producers approach the mirrors and place labels on the scenes: fun, culture, inclusion, but behind each label shone a hidden word written in fire: covenant. I understood that the enemy he disguises his traps as what seems good so that no one suspects, and every spectator who accepted those labels smiled without realizing they were signing an invisible contract with hell. The reflection in the mirror showed the difference. On earth it seemed like entertainment, but in the abyss it was a sentence. Suddenly, one of the mirrors showed a crowd of young people with Bibles in their hands, but their faces reflected characters from dark series. Satan raised a scepter and shouted, "Come, I don't need you to abandon your churches, you just have to bring my stories into your hearts, you just have to repeat my dialogue more than the scriptures. It doesn't matter what you profess, what matters is what you consume. That is what defines you." And I saw the mirrors shatter into fragments, each fragment falling upon them like blades, marking their bodies with the images of the characters. It was an inverted baptism, a consecration to the enemy. The Spirit spoke again in the midst of that scene. "The deception is so strong that even my servants can fall if they are not vigilant. This isn't about external prohibitions, it's about spiritual discernment. The enemy knows that visuals impact faster than written words, and that's why he has turned the screen into his pulpit. But whoever has ears to hear and eyes to see will understand that not everything that entertains edifies, and not everything that is seen is innocent." My tears flowed because I understood that the war is not fought only on altars or mountains, but also in living rooms, bedrooms, and devices, and millions were losing that battle without realizing it. The vision expanded to show something much larger than individual mirrors. I saw a colossal amphitheater in the heart of hell, a place where the stands burned like embers and millions of souls sat watching a gigantic screen made of lava and shadows. Series premieres were broadcast there as if they were liturgical ceremonies. Every time a new season began, the souls stood up and applauded as if they were on earth, but in hell, that applause turned into chains that fell upon them. I understood that the launches weren't simply entertainment premieres, but true collective rituals in disguise. Satan stood in the center with a scepter that glowed like a burning antenna, proclaiming, "Every episode is a sermon, every marathon is a vigil in my honor." The stands were packed with unblinking souls. It was as if they had lost the ability to look away. I saw demons disguised as directors shout, "Action!" and the applause erupted like thunder. In each episode, small seeds of heresy, idolatry, lust, and violence were planted, and those seeds leapt from the screen like burning embers that pierced the hearts of the viewers. The Spirit made me understand that the most dangerous thing was not the overt sin, but the disguised message, the slow normalization, the patient sowing. The demons didn't need to rush. They knew that a series could leave more of a mark on a generation than sermons. I watched as the global premieres were celebrated in the hell as true revivals. Every time millions on earth gathered to watch the same episode, on the same day, demonic drums sounded in the abyss. It was a spiritual echo. What seemed like a simple cultural event on the surface was actually a dark mass in the depths. The demons shouted, "Unity, prayer, control." And I understood that timing was key. When millions of minds absorb the same scene at the same time, a spiritual atmosphere opens. That atmosphere in the vision was like a black cloud covering entire cities. Not everyone saw the cloud, but everyone breathed its poison. Suddenly, the screen showed a series known for its glamour and sensuality. The souls in the stands began to imitate the characters, their bodies transformed with provocative clothing, their mouths repeated dialogues laden with lust. I saw young people who had once been consecrated to God, now laughing and dancing like puppets in hell. The demons applauded and said, they believe they are free in their sexuality, but here they are slaves to a plot. And then I saw how each series was designed as a specific trap, some trapped with violence, others with lust, others with occultism, others with mockery of the holy. Each genre was a noose, each scene an invisible rope. I was shown then what was happening on Earth at the same time. Entire families locked themselves in their homes to binge watch, the lights off, the screen shining in the center, food on the table. But in the vision, I saw that what really shone was a dark altar. The television was the altar, the food was the offering, the laughter was the singing, and the hours consumed were the sacrifice. Satan watched from the abyss and said, they themselves build my temples, I don't need to pursue them. They seek me willingly. I felt a chill because I understood that millions were unknowingly participating in rituals, consecrating their homes as modern-day shrines of the enemy. Advertising campaigns on Earth were celebrated in hell as demonic processions. I saw each poster for a new series lit up like a torch in the corridors of the abyss. Demons rushed out with those posters as if they were banners of war and placed them over souls, marking them as property. A promotional phrase that on Earth seemed innocent in hell was read as a curse. An attractive logo became a burning seal on the foreheads of thousands. It was a hidden language that only the spiritual realm could decipher, but it had real power over those who consumed it. The Spirit spoke loudly in the midst of that vision. Many of my children think that what they see doesn't matter, but the door of the eyes is the entrance to the soul. What you consume becomes what you are. The enemy has perfected his strategy. He doesn't pursue with whips, he entertains with lights. He doesn't need bloody altars, he needs bright screens. He doesn't demand visible sacrifices, he demands time, and every minute given to his productions is another brick in the spiritual prison. I fell to my knees crying because I understood that the greatest battlefield of this generation is not in distant deserts, but in living rooms, on cell phones, on the devices everyone holds with blind trust. As I continued to watch the infernal amphitheater, the screen began to project scenes that were not simple fiction, but spiritual essays. I saw how the demons used the series to normalize the end of the world, the Antichrist, and even the figure of Satan as a misunderstood hero. One series showed a charismatic leader uniting nations, but behind that plot was the Antichrist disguised as the savior. On Earth, The viewers applauded him, they admired him. His vision of peace, but in hell, the demons were shouting, "They're preparing to welcome our prince." It was like a slow indoctrination manual that sowed acceptance for what would soon become reality. The spirit whispered to me forcefully, "What you see is spiritual programming. Every plot, every character, every episode repeated millions of times was like a decree that penetrated human minds." I saw young people who had never opened the Bible, but could recite entire dialogues from series that exalted witchcraft or rebellion against God. I saw children imitating gestures of demonic characters, innocently repeating words that were spells disguised as funny phrases. On earth, it seemed harmless. In hell, every word was a contract, every gesture was an open door. The demons celebrated, knowing that ignorance is the greatest ally of their plan. They showed me a group of teenagers in their bedrooms watching the same series in different countries. They didn't know each other, they didn't speak the same language, but their souls were connected by an invisible thread that descended to hell. This synchronicity was used as a net, a spiritual web that trapped multitudes through the same content. I saw demons pulling those strings like puppeteers, and the young people reacted with the same emotions, crying, excitement, fear. I understood that the true magic of these productions wasn't in the story, but in the ability to synchronize collective feelings and direct them toward a single altar of darkness. The vision became even more chilling when I saw that some series functioned as catechisms of the enemy. They weren't just entertainment, they were lessons in anti-Christian doctrine, episodes that ridiculed the Christian faith, presented pastors as hypocrites, the Bible as an obsolete book, and prayer as a waste of time. Every time a viewer laughed at those jokes, another chain was added to their neck in hell, and Satan said, "They think they're making fun of us, but in reality they're making fun of heaven." It was then that I understood that laughter can be more dangerous than open blasphemy, because it disarms resistance and opens the door to deception. Then, the screen showed a futuristic series where humans lived enslaved by machines, but in hell, that scene wasn't fiction. It was prophecy. The demons applauded and said, "So it will be soon," and they are already accepting it. I understood that the enemy uses science fiction to sow resignation. First, he presents it as fantasy, then as entertainment, until finally it becomes reality, and no one resists it because they have already internalized it as inevitable. The Spirit told me, the Antichrist will present himself not as a tyrant, but as the culmination of all those narratives that the multitudes already love, and when they see him, they will say, "We have been waiting for him." I also saw how the music in those series was part of the trap. The catchy melodies were like spiritual keys that stayed in the mind for days, even weeks. They weren't simple songs, they were mantras in disguise. When young people hummed these songs, in the spiritual world they were invoking demonic atmospheres. In hell, each note was celebrated as a spell. Demons danced around the viewers, reinforcing the addiction and ensuring they returned for more episodes. The Spirit showed me clearly that the war wasn't just about the mind, but about the heart and emotions, and that music was one of the enemy's most effective weapons. I finally saw how some of these productions directly introduced occult symbols, pentagrams hidden in scenes, rituals disguised as choreography, phrases in ancient languages that were no coincidence, while on earth viewers saw it as an artistic detail. In hell it was deciphered as a real invocation. Every time a camera zoomed in on a symbol, the demons received it as a seal of ownership over those who observed it without discernment. It was then that I understood the final message of that vision block. The enemy's greatest trap is not open terror, but disguised entertainment. What we think entertains us in the spiritual world binds us, and what we think is a pastime is actually a silent pact. The Spirit led me to an even vaster room, resembling a colosseum carved from volcanic rock. In the center, a screen made of liquid fire projected not the series of Earth, but personalized episodes from the life of each soul. I saw men and women sitting on fiery bleachers, forced to watch their sins as if they were episodes of a never-ending program. Every fall, every lie, every adultery was repeated over and over, edited with demonic precision. Satan, like a proud director, pointed at the screen and said, I don't invent your sins, I just turn them into eternal entertainment," and the laughter of the demons filled the air. I shuddered to realize that these projections were not fiction, but archives of human memory. It was as if hell's Netflix had its own library of torment, where each soul was the protagonist of a shameful series with no ending. The souls screamed, wanting to close their eyes, but their eyelids were ripped off by fiery claws. Satan muttered, "There is no pause button here, there is no skip intro option here, everything repeats itself forever." I saw a young man weeping because each episode showed how he had rejected Christ in favor of temporary pleasures, and I understood that in hell, there is no forgetting, only repetition. Suddenly, the screen showed scenes that were not past memories, but hidden sins never revealed in life. I saw that they had led double lives, leaders who in public seemed saintly, but secretly nursed vices. Hell showed these episodes as if they were exclusive premieres. The demons applauded like a faithful audience, shouting for another season. Another deception revealed. It was a cruel spectacle, designed not only to punish, but to humiliate. Each soul was forced to confront not only its guilt, but also the mockery of millions of entities who enjoyed its fall as if it were a show. At that moment, the Spirit revealed something even more disturbing to me. Many of the series' ideas that triumph on Earth today are not original. They are inspirations taken directly from these infernal archives. Producers, screenwriters, and artists receive dreams and visions dictated by demons, copying what is already projected in the abyss. That's why so many stories seem to glorify sin, magic, violence, and power without God. They are not simple fictions, they are copies of hell's spiritual programming, and every time a viewer becomes hooked on those narratives, they also become hooked on the vibration of darkness that gave rise to them. I also saw how some souls were forced to act within those chapters like fiery puppets. They didn't just see their past, they relived it. Every betrayal, every word of hate, every act of idolatry was reenacted over and over again by demons disguised as actors who pushed them to repeat their own sins. It was a macabre play where no one had a voice, only a pre-written script. Satan shouted, "Here, the script isn't improvised, here you pay for what you signed in life," and the wails of those souls filled the Colosseum like an endless echo. The Spirit made me see that this was the enemy's true strategy, to accustom men on earth to consuming their own falls as entertainment. They laugh at adultery in comedies, celebrate murders in dramas, worship witchcraft in fantasies. "What you consume there, you will experience here," said the heavenly voice. I realized that every series that normalizes sin is a dress rehearsal for the eternity of torment. What seemed like a fictional game was actually a psychological and spiritual preparation to accept hell as a natural destiny. Then, the screen showed something that broke me inside. Children. I saw little ones who had spent hours watching animated series full of violence, witchcraft, and rebellion. In the abyss, those scenes became chapters of their damnation. Every innocent laugh in front of the screen was turned into tears in hell. Satan pointed to the children and said, "They are my favorite generation. They don't need to sin much, they just need to consume what I produce, and then they will grow up deformed, far from their Creator, ready for my kingdom." I felt my heart break because I realized that the most ferocious attack is not against the adults, but against the little ones, because they are the future bearers of the faith. Suddenly, the infernal Colosseum began to shake as if a great event was about to begin. Demons ran from one side to the other,